So, let's continue with that. Well, first of all, we'll take a little bit of a step back. So last week we started with the Aron. We said that there is a machlokas between the Ramban and Rashi about whether the cover, the kaporet, is part of the Aron or whether it's a separate vessel altogether. So there's a few halachic nafkaminot to come out of it. But there's another reason we're talking about, and then we said that the cover is dat, and the luchos inside and the Sefer Torah inside is the chokhmah, and the Aron itself, what holds it, what holds the Torah inside, that's the bina. So we have here a chokhmah bina dat construction, and we explained that dat is what gives life to things. And we said give the whole example about you can have even emotions, but when there's no dat in them, so they're finite. They're just the way they were born. Okay? And with dat, you can change things. The moment that you have dat, you suddenly infuse infinity into every structure, and it becomes alive. We'll explain more about that today. So first of all, you have to know that it's not by chance that Moshe Rabbeinu's month is Adar. I mean, in other words, if I would ask which month of the year is most connected to Moshe Rabbeinu, so the only answer that I can give is Adar, because in Torah it doesn't say when he was born, when he passed away, but we learned that it was a Zayin Adar, and it has some special relationship. He has some special relationship with Adar. So he's described as Raya Mehemna. He's the shepherd of faith. We say, what does that mean? That he turns faith from something that's just in the crown, something that's above me, into something that I can feel. So he's doing exactly that. He's adding dat into me. He's taking something that was an idea, let's call it, and he turns it into something that I can feel, that I can sense. The fact that I can sense it changes the whole relationship to Hashem. Because until now it was just something I read in a book, and now he turns it into an experience. He turns it into something that I know. Okay? So if he has any month that he's connected to, it's Adar. And the question is, what's the connection between Adar and Dat? Why is Adar, the month of Adar, so related to Dat? In the books of Kabbalah, it says that the pasuk of Chodesh Adar, the most important one, is Ladat Ba'alt Darkecha. How do we see Adar there? Ladat Ba'alt Darkecha V'chol Goyim Yishuatecha. To know in the land your way. It's Tehillim Samach Zayin. We say it every once in a while. A lot of times we say this every morning. It's actually the only Yakitun I can actually stand is the one to this parak. But that's in a different topic. What is Ladat? Ladat Ba'alt Darkecha means to know on earth, meaning in the land, your ways, or your way. Leodia B'goyim Yeshuatecha. Leodia is also from Dat. There's a little bit difference. Leodia is to proclaim, or to make known your salvation and your Yeshua. How do you get Adar out of this? So it's the second letter of the first three words. La dat, Dalet is the second letter. Ba'aretz is a reish, the aleph, Ba'aretz. Darkecha, the second letter is a reish. So it's not even in order, and it's a second letter. So almost you feel that somebody here kvetched. They made a kvetch to make this work. Okay, to make this somehow come out. Why? Because they felt there's something essential to Adar and Dat, and not just any kind of Dat, but the type of da'at that you can tell others. L'odia ba'aretz, da'at ba'aretz darkecha, l'odia b'goyim yeshuatecha. And it's not just any kind of telling some kind of story. It's a story of how Hashem saves me. That's the story that I want to tell. So we're beginning to open up the topic of the kovim on the cover being dat. Why? Because to tell a story you need two. You can't tell a story with just one person. You can't tell it to yourself with another, or at least you can't tell it to yourself in your mind. You have to voice it, you have to express it in some way. It has to come out. Okay? For that to be complete, there have to be two. Even if the other one is not present in front of me, I could do it through a book. And we'll see that that's how Hashem created the world. But there wasn't anybody else yet. But even just the fact that I have a medium that I can express things in, so that's already enough for the da'at to begin to come out. Okay, so what happened in Adar? What's the main story? The main story, theoretically, is again, how we theoretically think about it is Purim, because we're very attached to this story. But the sages say that something much more important happened in Adar, that is much bigger in a certain sense. What do they say? There's a machlokas, there's a dispute between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara, in the Mishnah actually, about when was the world created. Was the world created in Adar, or was it created in Elul? Is the first day of the world's existence the first of Nisan, or is the first day the first of Tishrei? When was man created? Now, what's the idea to say the man was created on the first of Nisan? Why would you say that? Because it's the first of the months. And what is man? How is he described in Torah? He's a medaber. Okay? He's not a thinker. He's a speaker. The chush of Chodesh Nisan is dibur. So it's saying that that's the day the man was created. That he's related to speech. Of course, what we're getting at, where we're going here, is that therapy is creation, is a creation of a new world. But it's not just a creation of a new world because speech has this magical aspect to it. There's a reason behind it. The reason is that when you speak, then you're creating that in yourself. And this is what we're going to focus on now. Why is it that by speech, through expression, but specifically through speech, more than anything else, you're actually adding that into your whole system? We sort of said something preliminary last time, I think I mentioned it here, that how does a child learn how to speak? We mentioned this when somebody talked about deaf people, whether they have that or don't. So he said that today they do, because we've been able to get over the problem with they're not hearing. So you see that they can express themselves. But without language, there's no consciousness, and consciousness is another name for that. You can't really begin to talk about developing consciousness if you can't talk at all. A person can't develop his consciousness. Again, consciousness is that it's alive. And not only consciousness is it alive, it's that it gives me choice. And that is like the seat of choice. The more conscious I have of something, the more ability I have to navigate it, to take it in the direction that I want or the direction I don't want.
You're saying expressing yourself brings you to greater consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And so you need it. A person... There's a song that I heard this morning, and somebody took one of Alterman's old songs. It was never made with music. And I guess there's like a trend now to take old poetry and set it to music, make new songs. So he had a song there is very interesting. He wrote it 80 years ago, and it's about a person going to Tel Aviv and losing himself because he has nobody to talk to. So he has an interesting thing. When nobody sees your face withers away. Okay? So the same thing is with speech, with your consciousness. If you have nobody to talk to, slowly you lose your ability to choose. You lose your ability to be who you are.
But we're including in this, like, if you journal daily, you have a lot of consciousness.
Okay, it helps a lot.
In that idea of
A
expressing.
lot of people will do it that way. So you hear about these people. So you read on Quora, what's the thing, the most important thing that you've done for yourself in the last, I don't know, so many years. So a lot of the answers I find time to journal every day. Why? Because the expression itself is already something, but it's not enough. Really, in the end, it's not enough. You need two kulvim. You need to have somebody speaking, somebody listening, and most importantly, the dialogue between them is what really creates not just consciousness in the sense of consciousness of myself. For that, journaling might be enough, but to have consciousness of ladat ba'aretz darkecha, to see how my way is a divine way, it's Hashem expressing Himself. For that, you need somebody else also. Okay, that's the main idea that we're going to talk about today. The dat is not just about adding more consciousness. Why? Because there's a famous saying in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Yosif dat, Yosif machov. That the more consciousness a person has of himself, the more pain it causes him.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Okay? Because what is he? If he is really frank, if he's really sincere with himself, so what does he see? He sees more and more that if uchshani le'atzmi mani, that if I'm only to myself, if I'm only here to uncover who I am, so in the end it's just painful. It doesn't lead anywhere. Because the main thing is to see that I'm more of, call it an expression of what Hashem wants in the world. If you want to say it another way, that the pshat would be what happened to me. Okay? And I'm not always aware of everything that happened to me, so maybe journaling helps and so on. But what you really need to get to is the drush. It's midrash Adam, that's what it's called. It's like it says, Zot Torat Adam. Adam ki yamut bo'oel. That the Torah really, in the end, wants to teach me how to take my own life and turn it into Torah. That's the main story. What does the Torah do? Imagine the Torah was just a book of halacha. Say it this way. What's the main thing missing from the Shulchan Aruch? There's no protagonist. Theoretically, you're the protagonist. You're supposed to do what the Shulchan Aruch tells you to do. But you can't identify. Why? Because there's no protagonist there. Who's doing all these things? The main thing about the Torah, its greatness, is that in the end it's a story. Even with all the, if you want, I think the first person to do this was the guy who wrote the Art of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. What was his name? I forget now. Pirsig, Robert Pirsig. So he hit upon the idea. I don't know if he was the very first one. Maybe it was just the first one that I read. But he hit upon the idea that if you want to make a book about philosophy interesting, the main thing that makes them dry is that there's no protagonist, there's no story, there's nothing going on. So you have to somehow, you're the protagonist, and you have to figure out how this relates to you. And most people have a difficult time doing that, they don't relate. But if I write the book, all the philosophical insights that I want as part of something happening to somebody, then suddenly it comes to life. Yeah. There was I think the original self-help book was the best one ever written. I don't think anybody's ever done anything similar to it even. At least nothing has had the same type of impact on me. Even though they tell stories, but they're not their stories. was Richard Bach. He wrote in the 60s and 70s, I guess. And The Bridge Across Forever was one of the best ones, where he explored relationships, but through his own relationship. And he did it in such a relatable and approachable way. So you so got involved with how he was seeing things, and that you, in the end, it was more than just insight. Is what you wanted to become him. Okay? It was that he imparted on you such a connection, a dat. Okay? He brought it to life in such a way that you began to want to be like him. He had the one that came before that was the one that was really a breakthrough, I think, bestseller. But before that, he also had another bestseller, which was the Notebooks of a Failed Messiah or something like that. I can't remember what it was called. Or Broken Wings. I don't remember and he writes it about like a regular person, as it were, that he meets. And this person is a Mashiach, he's a Messiah, he's a prophet, he can do everything. But he's down to earth, completely down to earth. You have to read this book. It's ingenious. It's very, very simple, it's short, it's not long. And eventually this man, he's like, he fixes, he's a pilot, Richard Bach, so he's fixing his engine. And this man that he meets, I can't remember what his name was, so he's a Messiah, so anytime he needs a wrench, he just holds out his hand. This is long before Star Wars, and maybe George Lucas got it from there. And he holds it out, and the wrench jumps into his hand. But he doesn't make anything out of it. It's not anything important. It's just that this is, what is he trying to do? He's trying to show quality. He's trying to show that if you have intent, if you want to do something the right way, then things fall into place. They work for you. It's not just that meaning, if you put these values into what you're doing, then it's elevated to another level. The main thing that I think that people came away from this book with was that the fact that I failed hasn't taken away from my being a Messiah, meaning hasn't taken away from the fact that I can still be special. It's very, in a certain sense, he's like saying a lot of Torah to Nefesh, but without Hashem. Even though he has God in it, but not in the same way. But in any case, he's building it the same way. What am I trying to get at? That without the protagonist, and not just any protagonist that you relate to, and eventually you want to be like. If you don't want to be like that person, so even if I give you the best knowledge in the world, it doesn't do it for you.
Maybe that's the issue of Shulchan Aruch.
That is issue. There's no question that that's the issue.
Well, how are we going to keep it?
Oh, so that's not how the Torah started out, and it's not even how the Gemara works.
Okay, but then we're cutting out the
Which is
Torah.
no, it's not so simple. Who said codification is the only way to go? Meaning, in other words, if we're going a little bit astray for a moment, but we'll come right back to this topic of the protagonist. If you learn only halacha and you don't learn Shulchan Aruch, you don't learn Gemara, you have no connection to it. Yeah, a person can't just learn halacha. It doesn't make any sense, because what do you do? You give me a list of what I need to do and don't. It's like an IKEA manual. I'm done with it. I throw it out. What do I care? What makes it real for you? That as you learn Gemara, you begin to connect, not to just what was said, but to who said it. That's why the Gemara is so full of Agadata and stories about the Tanaim themselves. And in truth, if you really want to teach Gemara in school, why is it so laughable what's going on now? Because they skip the most important parts. They don't get it.
Sideways online again.
How can I be sideways? Oh no, I'm in landscape mode. I'm not sideways.
I see him sideways.
Well, I'm in landscape mode, so they have to flip their. On a computer, they'll see it.
Not yours, basically.
On a computer, they'll see it perfect. Meaning, on the computer, they'll see it like it takes up the whole screen. Anyway.
Sorry.
If they come here, they'll see him like vertically.
Yeah.
There's plenty of stuff.
But they hear. At least they hear.
Someone just said, Leah said, can you tell him?
We see you sideways.
She says no, it's sideways.
Even on a computer?
She's like, right here.
On a computer it should be fine.
Tell them to just close their eyes and listen.
There are protagonists in the Gemara.
They're full.
Yeah.
But I'm saying what we're doing is by teaching Gemara as just a shakla v'tarya, just the halachic discussion, or
Women weren't supposed to learn Gemara, so.
what's the connection? Why women? What's the
I mean,
connection?
didn't they not teach Gemara to women before?
I don't understand. Why are we talking about women?
No, she's
Yeah,
just
right.
saying if it's so
Saying.
important. She's saying women
Why?
were missing out on that element.
Oh no, because you skip the whole you skip that whole area and you learn only the stories. On the contrary, what they learned, the stories were taught. Meaning there was a strong bond with the figures, not so much with the legal discussion. So if you want to have the legal discussion is almost an afterthought. Meaning, it's not that you don't need it, of course you need it, but if you don't create a bond with the protagonist, if there's no protagonist there to talk about, so why would I be interested in this? I mean, I could learn. That's why even it's almost there are people that learn just halacha. What do you mean you learn just halacha? That you get tested on Shulchan Aruch. In the end, they don't test you on Talmud, but you can't learn it that way. I spent years learning Choshen Mishpat and Even Ezer. You can't learn it that way. If you today maybe I can review this way, but I can't initially relate to it if I don't go back to the Sugya and the Gemara. And the Sugya and the Gemara is also only because I've learned it all at least once or twice, the whole Masechet. If I haven't learned it, it's just like it would just be dry matter. It's like philosophy. It doesn't. You can't connect to it. So I'm saying, what's the great thing? So now going back, what's the great thing about the Torah? The Torah starts from a protagonist. So initially there are these three protagonists: Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, then Yosef. But the main protagonist is certainly Moshe Rabbeinu. And when you read the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, you understand what dat is. Because what is he doing? He's imparting on you, almost like putting you in his place, and almost like asking you, what would you do? You get to know him so much that you can, one of two things. You might say, look, I really feel for you. I understand what you went through. And I really wouldn't ever want your job. Like, I just, leave me out of this. But you can't not be moved by it. You can't not feel it. You can't not connect with him as being Torah itself. And that's why in the end, it's called Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. In the end, the Torah is his story. That's what it is. So what happened from this in Chassidus? That the famous thing from Reb David of Lelov, which is just capturing what the Baal Shem Tov meant anyway. But he's saying that eventually we're going to come to a place where sound is also interrupted. Why would it be interrupted?
She's insisting that you still can't see it, not sideways.
I can flip it, but I think it's... Anyway. I can't imagine why the sound wouldn't be okay. Let me take it in and out. Let's see if the sound is better now. So what Reb David of Lelov said, that in this world I learn Torah with the protagonist being Abaye and Rava. And I did forget something about that. When you teach children, you have to start from the stories. That's the whole point. It's not just the stories that are in the Gemara. You have to piece together a picture of who the Gibor, who the hero, who the protagonist of every Masechet is. Is there somebody there who's the main figure? Like in Masechet Ketubot, which I'm learning now with the Rav again, so the main protagonist is Shimon ben Shetach. Why Shimon ben Shetach? Because he is the one who made this decree that you can't get married without giving a ketubah. And he's the protagonist. Why? Because his whole thinking is, how do I protect women? And then a lot of the Gemara afterwards is that we're ashamed. There's even in the 8th chapter, there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah that starts is, Rabban Gamliel says, I'm ashamed of what the previous rabbis did. What did they do? They had to decide between who are we going to go according to, the woman or the man, and they decided to protect the man. So he says, I'm ashamed of what they did in the past. You want me to do it again? So he completely switches it. But there's this whole thinking there that is like you have this whole story behind it, which is a very human story, and a person, Shimon ben Shetach, that you can connect with. I put my laptop on edge.
Is that Leah? Who's saying?
No, Chanasar 11. I don't know why, because it should. I've tried it, and it turns out fine. I don't know.
Exactly.
So the way to really learn Gemara, if you want to connect to the whole sugya, if you want to connect, you have to understand who the protagonist is, who's with him, who's against him, who's thinking like him, and so on. And you have to see it as a story. That you have to, the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu in the end is the hero, and everything that he does is apparently good, except for the few times he does something not good. And then you have to explain it, and you have to understand why did he do something that God didn't tell him to do, and so on. But you live it through the story of a person. So for there to be a story, there has to be at least two people. There has to be somebody telling the story, and there has to be somebody listening to it. But not just listening. The other side has to also interpret. It has to be a medrash. Meaning that in a therapy session, the role of the therapist is to offer commentary. It's not just to help you probe deeper. That also. But it has to be a dialogue. A dialogue in the sense of, can I offer an interpretation that makes you come out of yourself and begin to think about ladat ba'aretz darkecha, that it's about knowing how Hashem is working through me. That's my role as the therapist. I have to keep introducing Hashem, because again, why? Because the person who's undergoing the therapy, they are more concerned with understanding, let's call it the pshat. The pshat again is, what did I go through? What did I experience? What did it mean to me? And so on, all these things. But because of that self-involvement, it's very hard to see it from the outside. And what I provide as the therapist is the commentaries, the medrash on what you're telling me. Again, beyond my role is helping you go deeper into yourself, which again, you know that I'm not crazy about in general. I don't think that that's needed so much. Exploring more and more, because again, it takes you further and further into the confines of yourself, and it makes it more and more difficult to bring it out and place it ba'aretz and put it here, that this is something that Hashem is doing with the world. In other words, your life has to become a book of Torah. And what's it going to say in the book of Torah? Is it going to say, Moshe thought this, he was very angry, and Hashem said? No. The ratio here is I can't say offhand exactly what it is, but the feeling I get is that it's something like 40-60. That it's 40% about actions and maybe some feelings and relationships. And it's 60% about how you take that, or how that plays into discovering God. Okay?
Really? 40, 60?
Okay.
You're saying 40 is the practical part of your life?
Is the events themselves, and I'm including your feelings and your emotions into that.
It's like 1090.
Okay? No, I think there's quite a bit of it, because again, when you look at the medrash, you see it more clearly. The medrash is very good at telling you this and this thing is is teaching us so and so about the human psyche, and it's not necessarily telling me something about Hashem yet. And then there are other things that we take directly into understanding Hashem, or understanding mitzvot, or whoever it is.
Okay, but we're all part of the whole of Hashem. Like I'm saying, at the end of the day,
Nachon, but you don't know that. That's exactly the whole problem.
It's about the discerning, like I'm saying, the differentiation. Of
The dat is the dat ba'aretz darkecha. It's not just to know what I'm experiencing, but to see it as this is a revelation of Hashem. And that passes directly through the mouth, and that's really what we need to discuss now. Why is it that, or how is it that this great thing passes through our speech? How does speech become the vehicle that transforms events and feelings and emotions into the infinite? And that's dat. That's what it means, that I have dat. La dat ba'aretz darkecha. Le'odia b'goyim yeshuatecha.
But we always talk about how, in therapy, the patient can speak so much, and the therapist can hardly say anything, maybe even nothing, and the patient can indeed progress in their life, and maybe even come to that point of learning. So it's really.
But it's only them and themselves.
No. Oh, you're saying I'm saying if they're with them.
In the end, it causes pain and suffering.
If they're with the therapist.
Self-knowledge, in the end, will cause.
But I'm saying they're with someone else.
Yeah, they're with somebody else, and he's
But
only helping
you
them.
spoke about the God-fearing therapist who knows that it's not about how much he says. It's about how much he's here to hold the story with him.
Sedel, very good. Which
But
story?
now you're focusing on how much he speaks, how much a therapist
No, it doesn't have to say much.
Right.
But you have to keep asking yourself, and you have to keep offering a possibility. A lot of times, again, the person is. My role as being in therapy is to explore kind of where I am, what I'm feeling, and so on. The role of the therapist, if you're doing Torah therapy, is that he has to offer you a perspective that includes Hashem in it. Something that is hard for me to do, because the only Hashem I can include in my own perspective is very limited, because it'll always be very subjective. I can't really connect it to reality. Again, aretz here is like saying, connecting it to reality. How is Hashem functioning through me? How is Hashem acting through me? How is my life not just a story of events and emotions that I feel, but something that has value and meaning in the divine sense? Again, because otherwise, really what is, how many people have the privilege of feeling that their lives, by virtue of just the actions and just the relationships, are divine? Very few people are like that. Because you'd have to be like a prime minister, you'd have to be somebody who's really fashioning history, because that's the only, you have to be enough in the papers, and even not as a comedian, you'd have to be somebody who's really doing something. You can't just be a showbiz personality. Unless you're somebody like, I don't know, maybe, you've reached super fandom, which is like, somebody like Spielberg. So he's already shaping things. He's not just, or you're doing something personal that becomes, like the Vakovsky brothers with their Mishigas. But you have to, there's very few people who can look at their lives and say, themselves, the relationships themselves, they're already making a mark in this world. And for the rest of us, of a regular people, not to be lost in obscurity,
But you come down.
it begins with understanding that Hashem is functioning through me also.
But you have a whole bunch of things to be mitaken inside your own neshama. That's enough work to keep going for a long time.
They go together.
Right, I'm saying that I don't see that as separate. Why can't that be Hashem? Hashem is saying, I want you to work on this. This is your thing.
Very nice. But you get to a certain point in life where you feel that there also has to be expression to this tikkun. I'm not just doing it for the sake of me being a better person.
By default, if you are being mitaken yourself, your interactions are different. Everything.
Nachon. So, but beautiful,
impacted by you differently.
Wonderful, but they don't seem to be very divine in the end. Because what impression are they going to leave on the world? How do I see them as being a statement about what God wants in the world?
When you meet people who You're inspired by them.
Oh,
You don't even know why.
exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. So you have to also be inspired, not just by meeting other people, but by being able to see that. Okay? And you can't see that unless you do a medrash on what you're experiencing. Because let's say I'm not metukan yet, or even I'm on the way, or somewhere. Most of us aren't. So, are my interactions just there to cause me pain, to make me suffer, or so on? Or is even the fact of just learning something from that interaction a revelation of the divine? If you can do it by yourself, so fine. So you're right. You don't need anybody. But most of us can't. Meaning that we're stuck in feeling this as being some kind of very limited existence that is all, fury and anger and frustration, and then it ends, and nothing happened. But it's not true. If I can see how everything that is happening to me is part of, again, it's learning Torah. I'm learning Torah through this. My life is the best book through which I can learn. It's a vehicle. It's basically a vehicle. Everything that's happening to me, and the insights, they can be very deep, and they can be stuff that even if I've read in a book, it's not the same as when I actually experience it. And that, again, that's da'at. That it's not just what's happening, it's bringing it to life. It's not just that I read this in a book and I know that there's such and such an idea, but when I see it enacted in my life, it becomes something different. So again, that was Reb David of Lelov's idea, that today I learned the Masechet, that's called the Megillah, let's say. But in the future, how will I learn? I'll learn the Masechet of David of Lelov. Because my life itself is a Masechet. But again, what does that mean? It means that in any kind of interaction, but especially in the therapeutic interaction, the highest level of it, the way to bring out how my life is divine is by turning it into Torah. It's basically darshaning it. That's what it's called. To do a medrash on it. And that's inspiring, by the way, to both the person who's learning and the person who's being learned. It doesn't matter. The therapist comes out every time when I learn Gemara. So I don't mechadish. Usually I don't have a new novel idea, but I come out very inspired. Why? Because there's a person here, and there are things that I relate to. It's not that what comes out of me also is something that I related to usually. And it says I'm able to express something that touched me in a certain way.
Isn't this all really like an individual constantly asking, what is God trying to tell me?
Yes, but the whole point is that I can't do it by myself.
But we do it all the time. We don't always have someone we can do it with.
Right, but that's the point.
Every day I'm saying, Hashem, what are you trying to tell me here? And sometimes we do figure it out.
One of the ways, for instance, to be able to do it by yourself, if we're talking about journaling, is that you go back a year later, and then you try to understand. You're still limited because you're still you, but with that distance comes some kind of objectivity that allows growth to occur and new meaning to come out. But it's not enough. Really, you need another person who's just different. So these are the two kulvim. Really, the two kulvim are like a symbol of two people speaking to each other. And that's that. That's where that comes from. That's where Moshe Rabbeinu hears his Torah from. From between the two kulvim. And that's where we hear our Torah from. Again, it means that it's not enough for me to come and say, this is where people fall. That they hear from Reb David of Lelov that my life is divine. Because it can be the basis of Torah. But Torah is never learned as just one person. There have to be two. How are there two? There's one whose life it is, and there's the other who's now interpreting it. If we say it in another way, this is called the subjective and the objective viewpoints. And I don't, as a therapist, I'm not supposed to become subjective. Meaning I don't have to completely take on the viewpoint of the person who's sitting in front of me. And I have to retain some objectivity. And that's exactly why the interaction is so powerful. So let's see, first of all, the first time that this happens in Torah, that something like this happens.
What with Moshe?
So the first place that the Baal Shem Tov notes this is a famous verse. It's famous for anybody who studies the Baal Shem Tov, but it's also very difficult to understand at first what he wants. But he says that when Yaakov went to Haran, on the way he slept in Beit El, in this place. And which we say was on a Har Moriah maybe. So when he was sleeping, he saw his dream, his famous dream with the ladder and the angels. When he woke up, he said these words. He says, "Vayira Yaakov me'od, vayomar ma nora hamakom hazeh, en ze ki im bet Elokim, v'ani lo yadati. En ze ki im bet Elokim v'zeh sha'ar hashamayim, v'ani lo yadati." So says the Baal Shem Tov, "Vayira nora," that he was in awe, and he said, "How terrible, how awful is this place," meaning in the sense of awe, in a good way. That's a yichud, and that is yichud. That's a union. He unified yirah with norah. So what is this? What does he want? It's very cryptic. So I talked about this in the Tuesday classes, but I don't think anybody here was there. I just introduced it there a few months ago. But this is one of the most important things that happened in the modern era, is that we can't rely on our subjective viewpoint anymore. Meaning we become, somebody divorced us from reality. The person who did it is usually, we point fingers at Kant, but it doesn't matter. It was hanging in the air for a long time. What does it mean? It means that how can you be certain that what you subjectively experience is what is objectively out there? And in the worst case, it becomes dementia, meaning that you're imagining something on the inside, subjective, and objectively that's not what's going on at all. The place that people most encounter it is when you think that somebody's angry at you or is not nice to you. There's nothing doing. It's not about that at all. They're having a bad day. Something else happened to them. What do you know? So your subjective feeling has nothing to do with the objective reality. That's the number one issue in the modern human condition. That I'm not sure that what I sense, what I feel, especially how I interpret things, is the way that they are objectively. There's a subject-object divide. That's what it's called. Now this existed when you go back even to the ancient Greeks. So there was one of them there, I can't remember his name, who was a safkan. Safkanut is a skeptic. There were skeptics there also. So maybe you can't trust what your senses tell you. So that's a different issue altogether, whether I can trust what I see. Maybe what I see, I don't see so well. And I need glasses, so I can't see exactly what I see. What I think I'm seeing is not what I'm seeing. But here we're not talking about the senses. Here we're talking about how I interpret things. And how I subjectively experience things. I'm not talking about, it's true that it's also dependent on my senses and so on. But if I interpret somebody's emotions, that's not my senses. That's already something deeper inside that's taking the information from my senses and saying it in a certain way. And then the objective says, wait a minute, maybe that's not at all what the reality is. So right away, when you talk about subject and object, you've opened the path to psychology. Really, that's what you've done immediately. There's something called folk psychology. You look it up on Wikipedia. What is folk psychology? It's how everybody knowing that there's something behind everybody's, the people that they're looking at, there's something behind their stare. What do they do? Or behind their actions. So folk psychology is trying to figure it out without a lot of tools. Just using rationality and saying, he must be like me. What would I do if I was that? And that leads to a lot of times to a lot of misconception, because you don't know that the other person is suffering from something that you don't even have a handle on. You've never. I always say that that now, if you want to understand, a lot of mental illnesses, you go on a Quora. Why do you go on Quora? Because Quora, there's a lot of questions. What is it like to be schizophrenic? What is it like to have dementia? What is it like to be bipolar? And then you get first-hand accounts. Usually, people are not so open, even in a psychological setting. They don't just describe exactly how they're feeling. But there's something about this ability to write out to everybody, the entire world. And in a certain sense, you're anonymous, even though people on Quora aren't necessarily anonymous. They could be using their real names and so on. But people are very open. And you read accounts that give you such insight into objectively, subjectively, what are they experiencing? That it's shocking.
It's very subjective.
No, I'm saying they're describing their subjective experience, which is usually not open to me, because I have to interpret in the way that I subjectively get it. So in a certain sense, I'm getting the objective picture of what's going on here, much better than I would even in therapy. Even though in therapy I do build a picture of what the person is experiencing, I try to build it all the time, but I don't usually get monologues like that. People will usually say, this happened to me, this happened. It's like a chance again. It's the basic, we're working on the basic level of just what happened to me, what did I experience, and so on. To get to the level of what is it like to be there, that takes time, even in therapy. And to get to that level with somebody who is suffering from something is even more difficult sometimes. Okay? But it's a topic in and of itself. But that basic subject-object divide has been plaguing the world, you could say, since the 1600s, early 1600s. When the Baal Shem Tov said this, that Yaakov experienced Vayira me'od. Vayira me'od means he felt awe. He felt the fear. Vayomar ma nora hamakom hazeh. How awful is this place? Which one is the subjective? Which one is the objective?
Well, Vayira would sound
subjective, right?
subjective.
Very subjective. What about the second one? Ma nora hamakom hazeh en zekim shar hashamayim en zekim bet elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. So he's describing an objective reality. What is dividing the two? What's in between? In the verse. Vayira Yaakov me'od. Vayira Yaakov. Me'od is later. Vayira Yaakov vayomar. So which verb is stuck in the middle? Vayomar. So he says that the act of saying, of speaking it, meaning he felt something, then he spoke it, it turned it into being objective. That's what unifies, in the end, the subject. That's the only way to reunify the subject with the object. Meaning, to get you to a sense of objectivity. What is that? For us, objectivity means that how is Hashem looking at this? And it turned out that he was right. That it wasn't just that his subjective experience of awe was something that he went to the grave with and that was it. Eventually, the temple was built there, and it caused awe for everybody. So he's right. This is not just a subjective experience. There is something awful about this place. Awesome about this place. Okay?
Okay, but you didn't say it to someone else.
He didn't say it to somebody else, but why does he say it even?
No, then he says it.
If it would say, Vayomar belibo, he said in his heart, And it's
period. לא יודע.
בסדר. For whatever reason, he spoke it.
You don't know that nobody was there.
Nobody was there, but yet he spoke it. That thing, to be able to speak it, to express it, not to write it down. He didn't write it down. He actually said it. Okay?
Yeah, but that's the thing, I can talk to God.
Hold on. Oh, he's not talking to Hashem.
No, I'm saying I can talk to the cosmos.
Okay, you can talk to the cosmos, but that's not the point.
Okay.
You can talk to the therapist also.
Okay. Or not.
What we're getting at is that the act of speech is able to move you from the subjective to the objective. It's you call it the bridge between them. Okay? It's what connects them. That's dat. Dat is what is able to unify. That's why how the Baal Shem Tov calls it. He says this is a unification. Yichud yira'ah nora. Yira'ah being the subjective feeling that he felt, and manura makom hazeh, that this place where I'm feeling this really is awesome. That's the objective. And speaking it, that was the dat. That was the unification. So before we even go any further, this is a small insight, but is very essential, and I think we miss it. We don't. At least I didn't appreciate it until a month ago. Everybody speaks. Well, most people speak, even to themselves. How many people repeat the same words, not regular words like "Hi, how are you"? I'm talking about how many people repeat words with meaning. Let's say, like an important quote from some book or something like that. How many people repeat something many times during their lives? It's very uncommon. But the Jew lives that way. Meaning, if I would think about how, just by davening, by learning, I keep repeating the same phrases again and again and again. Why?
It should be like new.
So, hold on, you're ahead.
No, in a way the Torah
Why do we keep repeating? The Torah repeats also a lot of times, especially since you keep learning it. Again, you keep learning it. I repeat it every year. We go through the whole same cycle again and again. But even just davening, just Baruch Atah Hashem, the brachas that we say, a Jew is constantly repeating the same key phrases. How many phrases are there? Maybe there's 10,000 of them. I don't know, 1,000 of them, whatever they are. But every day I go through them, 100. Again, 100 blessings every day. So every time, who else does something like that? Maybe, but what kind of people do something like that? No.
meditative.
Yeah, people have mantras that they repeat.
Okay, well, let's take not in the meditative state.
When you're teaching something.
When you're teaching something, or
To children.
you don't have to be teaching.
You teach the same subject.
Lecturing.
What?
Lecturers.
Lecturing what you lecture the same subject over.
You lecture, when you lecture, it's not just that. I remember once, I didn't know this before before I met these people, but I once had a chance to meet Brian Greene in America. He's a famous physicist who did a lot of like lay physics, like explaining things to regular people. He's very good at it. So he has this lecture, and I asked him, it sounded when you gave it that it's so amazing. Like everything is theatrically perfect. I said, how many times have you given this lecture? He says, I've given it maybe 60 times, but I've said it over 1,000. And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, you're telling me that to really become this thing that you're teaching, you have to say it 1,000 times. It wasn't.
They lose it when they do that too.
What?
I've been to lectures that I just know it's the same lecture. And
Right, and they're already right, and
it
it becomes empty.
Yeah.
It just becomes an empty thing. But you have to be careful with that, because Judaism also goes in that direction, right? So a lot of people feel that every time that I've said it so many times, so he's saying the Midah in a way that he doesn't even know when he starts, doesn't know when he ends, and doesn't know what was in between. It could also become rote. But the whole trick is that something that's really going to affect me is not something that I say once. I have to go through it again and again and again and again. And the truth is that if I don't have a medrash on it, if I don't have a way of gaining new insight into what I'm saying, it will become rote. But if I don't repeat it, it'll never get to the level of being something that has dat, something that's able to connect me, to enliven me with what I'm saying or what I'm studying.
It's really like any art form.
Okay, it's the same thing. But you have to speak it. How many times do you have to speak it? Well, you begin with 100 times. This week I was talking with my son, and so I told him he had heard a story about somebody that was it's a typical Chabad story, that somebody walked into a room full of people that weren't keeping chametz on Pesach, and they started talking to them. They had actually brought them food because they were afraid that they didn't have kosher for Pesach food. So they brought them. They went to a lot of trouble, and they brought it. And when these young men saw the Lubavitchers at the door, they told them, "Don't come in, don't come in." It turns out that they were eating hamburgers, right, from McDonald's or something. They said, "Don't come in, don't come in." But they did come in, and they said, "We brought you food." And they just talked to them for a few minutes, and were so moved by it. So one of them said, "This hamburger I'm dedicating now to Hashem." So what do? He threw it in the trash and said, "The whole Pesach I'll just eat, the food you bring me." And my son was really moved by it. He's at the age when these things really touch you, and I think they could touch you at an older age also. But he's really now into that. He's 14, and he said, "Wow, this is what they talk about when the Yechida is revealed." Okay? This is what it's talking about. And then he said to me, I was surprised that he was able to say this, and he said, it's much easier for somebody who's not from to reveal their Yechida, their singular connection with God, than it is for somebody who's from. He's 14, he's already, maybe, what's the word? He's already, not tired, but jaded. Yeah. He's done so many times already. It's like, but somebody who's never done it, that novelty of doing it once is such a chiddush. I told him, I said, you're right, because that's the yechida in somebody who hasn't ever done it. It's the first time that you do it. The first time that you reveal that you have a connection with God. But what about somebody who's been doing it 100 times? So I told him that's what it says in the Tanya, that En dome shone pirko me'a pamim le'shone pirko me'a ve'achat pamim. That it's not the same thing to repeat something 100 times as it is to repeat it 101 times. So that extra one, that's the Yechida also. Because what does Yechida mean? It means one. What's the idea? The idea is that if you're able to break out of the repetition, the rote repetition of something, and it only requires one more time. That one time that's extra, for instance, that people daven 3 times a day. So I tell them once in a while, daven once again, even though the Shulchan Aruch says it's not just a great idea. But if you feel that it's falling into rote, it's always the same, you've got to do something more. That something more is the extra one, the moreness that reveals that liveliness, that dat, that really that reconnects you with what your source was. So it could be the first time, and it could be the extra time, but they have the same impact on you. So even if you've gone through something many, many times, that extra little something, that could be enough to turn everything around. But getting back to this idea that there's 2 kulvim, so they have to talk to one another. One is the objectivity, is holding the objective chair. The other one is holding the subjective chair. And the role of the therapist, he's the kulv who's listening. And most of the time he's listening. So he has to provide the connection to the objective. The objective is nadat ba'aretz darkecha. It's to know that this is all something that has to do with godliness. Otherwise, you fall just into yourself, just into subjective self. And that's where you remain.
Where do you see the repetition idea? I mean, like, I agree with it, but like,
I don't see a repetition idea. I just said that you brought it up, or maybe someone else brought it up, I don't remember, that it can become empty.
No.
Adele brought it up.
Where do you see the positive of the repetition? Like, I get it.
Certainly. That when I repeat davening every day, I don't have to say another davening really. It's enough for me just to add the objective into the subjective that I'm doing. How do I do it by myself? It's called isbonenus, meaning that I look at this pasuk that I've been saying every day for the last 46 years, and suddenly I say it with a new meaning. That new meaning for me, that's the new objective. That's the new place that it's going into. That's the novelty in it.
I understand. I was more asking like in the sources, like I don't know. I'm saying here Yaakov speaks. There's no like saying I don't see this repetition idea in the sources. Like where do we see the doing of it again and again and again? Where is that like in the? Okay.
Where is it?
I'm also troubled that Yaakov is not speaking to anybody because we keep talking about someone else.
Right. It's the actual speaking it out.
Well, that's what I said at the beginning. You said no, you need to have someone else.
But you need to have somebody else to make it really objective. Said that's maybe for Yaakov it works that way, but you could say that it takes the Baal Shem Tov in the end to figure out that this is what's going on, that there has to be somebody at the other end that's receiving it, and suddenly understands. Wait a minute, what you just told me is that you are trying to connect the subjective with the objective. It could be that even for Yaakov that's not known until it actually ends with the receiver at the end. Okay. So we're building on this idea of that being enlivening and unifying. What we have to add now is how Sefer Yetzirah sees the whole process of dat. So it says there something I think most people have heard already because it's going around already, that God created the world with 3 books. What are the 3 books? It says Sefer, Sofer, Vesipur. Sorry, the order is Sofer, Sefer, Vesipur. Sofer is the writer. The Sefer is the book. And the Sipur is the story. So if you don't have all 3 components, so there's no world. You have to have, it's not the world. It's something else. It could be a blueprint. It could be, like we said, there's no dat. It could be that there are emotions even, all these things. But it's not a world yet. It's not something alive. Remember I gave the example last week that in terms of affinity, I could be more connected to one child than to another. But when it comes to adding dat, when I begin to add dat, and dat is the feeling of creation, then at that moment, I understand that I have infinite feeling for all my children. And with infinity, you can't say one is bigger, one is smaller. They're infinite. Each one is a separate world unto themselves. I have to feel that sense of creation in them. And especially that they're a product of me creating them. So for there to be a world, meaning that there to be something infinite, something alive here, you have to have all 3 components. Sofer, Sefer, Vesipur. The writer, the book, which we'll call the medium, but also the story. Now, what's the order? And so the Alter Rebbe writes that Sofer is Chochmah. We'll explain why in a moment. The Sefer is Bina. The book itself is understanding. And the Sipur is the Dat. What is this really? This is what we call that in every action there are actually three components. There's who is acting, what is he acting upon, or what is the result, and what is the action.
But it's the action in the middle and then the result.
Right. That's why Chokhmah Binah and Dat is in the middle. So even though we say Sofer, Sefer, V'Sipur, the Sipur is the Dat, it's in the middle. That's the one that's alive. It's the one that's... the Sefer is also alive, and the Sefer could also be alive. Again, a living book is very interesting if you see one. But the main thing that's being created here in the end, the action, is Sipur, is a story. So what's going on here? The Sofer and the Sefer, right? A writer has to have some medium to work with. The medium is not. Maybe I would have expected that the medium would be my speech. So the medium is what's being acted upon. Okay? What is being affected? So he's writing a story, but the story appears in the end in a book. But you could stop writing a book. There would be no story. You could just jot down words one after another, like gibberish. There's no story there. Or more than that, you could write down what happened to you during the day. Events, actual events. They make sense, but there's still no story here. It's almost like you go back and write your memoirs, right? People have. That's the beauty of all these memoirs. The president has his the timesheet written out every day, right? So what was planned, and then eventually they corrected, and what actually happened every moment. What does that not tell you? There's no story. It's just events. It's just things that happened. Where's the story? The story is what makes it alive. That you can't get just from the events. Even if you have the sense of objectivity, what actually happened, it doesn't help you reveal the story. The story is a different component altogether. How do you reveal that component? So that's what Dat does. That is what reveals the story inside of my life. That's what the therapist has to do with me. So even if I'm listening, it doesn't, meaning I'm like the objective, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Dat will appear. There needs to be a third component here. The third component is like what was in between the Kruvim. It's what's happening in between them, which is actually more important than what they're saying to one another. And that's what's created out of the interaction. Now, it could be not created. It could be that there's a therapy session, and all that's happening is, again, I said, like the person's delving deeper and deeper into themselves, but that doesn't make a story. That's not a story yet. That's still just the writer. It's more and more about me. To make it actually become a story, and the only story that is important in the end, and the only book that's worth reading about my life, is when the outcome, what's coming out from the writer's words and bouncing off the listener, the book, is a story about how, and this is the important part, how Shem is coming through this person's life. Otherwise, it's not a story. It just remains inside the writer. There's no therapy going on. It could be more and more pain. It has to come out in the sense of a story that you can tell. That's why Hasidic stories, all they do in the end is they tell you about Hashem. That's really what they're about. They're not about the protagonist.
People can tell like deep, meaningful, life-changing like stories where they really learned about themselves and the world and their relationships, like not inside themselves, outside of themselves.
Exactly.
Never mention God.
Nachon. What? I don't need to hear the word.
Stories.
I don't have to hear the word God for it to be divine. It's not the word God that I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is exactly what you just said.
But that's just really
The deep, meaningful, and that they came out of themselves. Okay? That I didn't fall further and further deeply into who I am, but rather I discovered that I'm something that I didn't think I was. Or that I discovered that I could relate to things in a way that I didn't think that I could relate. I discovered that there's a world out there. There's a beautiful thing that I heard from my mother-in-law yesterday. We had a yortzeit first yortzeit for my father-in-law. So she said he was always very scared. He was scared of everything, and mamash of everything. And the only place that he felt comfortable was in his books. Like he used to study a lot, and not so much even Torah. He used to study a lot of philosophy. And then she said, when I met him, the biggest thing that I gave him was that I took him out on trips around the world. I wouldn't even, like in a million years, I wouldn't have thought of that. Like that's what, she looking back at the perspective of their marriage, I don't know how many years together, she said the biggest thing I gave him was I showed him that the world wasn't such a scary place. That you can go and tour somewhere and get along. What happened? He came out of himself. That's therapy. And suddenly he saw that there's a world out there and it's not as scary as it looks. And you can actually go there and you can even enjoy yourself. So what happened? I'm not so big on the touring itself, obviously. But the fact that a person was able to overcome that picture of the world being a nasty, terrible place, for whatever reason that he had, so that's exactly coming. So what is that? That for me is also Hashem. I don't have to hear the word Hashem there. She wouldn't even say it. She's not from. But for me, that you gave him dat. You gave him, and dat is almost always, in the end, la dat ba'ot tzedakah. It's real dat is always taking you out of yourself. The other type of dat leads you further and further inside. That's Yosif dat, Yosif machov. It's just more and more knowledge about myself. But the real knowledge that I'm looking for is the knowledge that is not in myself, that is outside of me. And that's what becomes the real story.
Sometimes the knowledge inside of yourself is very useful for the knowledge outside. Like it's very useful eventually to use.
Okay, but it has to come out. The fact that Yaakov felt fear, beautiful. But until he said it, it didn't become something that led to the building of the Beit HaMikdash.
I'm just saying, even like you can have, you can feel like you're spinning inside yourself and having this moment where you're internally interpreting something you're going through. But the minute you meet someone else and share that, and they're moved, and they do something with that knowledge or perspective, you've already uplifted them.
Well, why did they do something with it? Because you told it in the sense of that. That's what I'm saying. You didn't give it as wisdom. Right. That's what I said. That the Shulchan Aruch is not something that imparts a feeling that I want to be like this. Because who do you want to be like? Mm-hmm. There's no story here.
Because you lived it.
Okay. So again, that's the power of the Torah, because the Torah is telling me things in terms of a story, and then it makes me want to be like the protagonist. It makes me want to identify with it. It makes me want to relate to them. So there's another topic that we need to talk about this related. We've been hinting at it all the time, but that is in the mouth. That's what it's called. And it's not just in the mouth. It's this mouth, you have to stop thinking of our mouth as being the mouth. what does it mean, the second part of the verse that we said? Nadat ba'alz darkecha lodia b'goyim yishuatecha. To tell the nations of Hashem's help, or call it that everything is accompanied by Hashem. There's another pasuk that says, "Veiru kol basar yachdav ki pi Hashem diber." That all the flesh in the world, meaning all the people in the world, will see together that Hashem has spoken. What is it talking about that Hashem has spoken? So right away, the simple understanding is, Hashem has spoken, is that the Torah is what Hashem said. So that's definitely true. But higher up, it's something else. So that ba'alz darkecha, to make it known that Hashem is here, is not just about the Torah. Because if it's just about the Torah, so it's about whose life? 20 individuals, 30 individuals, 40 individuals, but that's it. Now that really, veiru kol basar yachdav ki pi Hashem diber, to see that Hashem has been speaking, has to be much deeper. It has to be that you see that every individual's life is Torah, and how can that be? How can that even be? So you have to redefine what mouth means. What's special about the mouth? Why is the mouth so important? What is it a symbol of? What's going on in the mouth? So it says the main thing about the mouth is that it's a recess, it's a cavern. It's like an empty cavern that something is happening in there, and then words come out. So what is that a symbol of? What was like that? There's something that was a cavern, and then something.
Yeah, the air.
Maybe it was something more in creation. So that's how the Arizal describes the creation of the world.
Something from that.
Something from that. But more than that, first Hashem had to create a void, an empty space. And in that emptiness, then He can begin to create the world. So there's an understanding, and the Arizal says this himself, that Pi Hashem diber, Pi Hashem, the mouth of Hashem, is actually the Chalal HaPanui. It's actually the empty space that Hashem first created, and that's His mouth. So not to think about Hashem speaking as just being actual words. But when Hashem speaks, a world is created. How do you see that? He opens it's like almost that the whole world is His mouth. And it's all His mouthpiece. And it's like a mouth. It's empty, and then it begins to fill with letters, with words. Creates reality. That's why, in essence, that's what the Rizal is saying. The first bet of Bereshit, the bet itself is the written letter. But what's surrounding it? You've probably heard this before. If I draw a letter around the bet, what letter do I get? The pay. You see this, the way to tell if a sofer is good, back to Sefer and Sipur. If the writer is good, if the person is a scribe who's writing the Torah scroll, if he's good, is to look at his pays. Because inside every pay, you have to see a white bet. It has to be very clear. The more clear it is, the better a writer he is. Because it's the hardest thing to do. It's a halacha even. That it says that every time that you write a pay, inside, think about what it looks like. I don't have the other thing. But if you look at any, you have it?
No, she's just drawing.
You drew it?
She's drawing her own.
So let me draw it a little bit. Maybe I'll be able to do it better.
Can you sign it also?
Yeah, at the end. I didn't get it better than you. So the easiest way to see it is like this, but I didn't get it better than you. You have to bring up an actual pay from the Sefer. Let me see if I can do that. Hold on.
Yeah, it's basically. So so the idea is is bet as in retire. So in every.
So then, pay. Tav. Me.
It's almost like that, I get it, it's like the pay, the mouth is that outline of the Torah. It's a make, yeah.
So here you see it very clearly.
I see.
This is what it looks like. See?
Right. Yeah, you see it so clearly.
So this is a good writer.
Right.
So you see the bet inside the pay.
You know, there's images that you can look at two different ways. Like you can see
Okay,
the
okay.
woman and the.
So the letter bet is always surrounded by a pay. So says the Arizal, really the first bet of Bereshit is inside Hashem's mouth. It's coming out of his mouth. Pay means pay. It means a mouth. So what's the first thing that he speaks? He begins to speak. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. And it's the only letter that has such a thing. Even though the tet is close to it, but it's when you write a tet, it's actually just a reverse. It's a pay turned 90 degrees. But there's no halach that you have to make another letter inside. It's the only letter that has a letter inside. So really, what is it telling me? That the mouth has in it the ability to create a world. The story of my life. The story of my life is a world. It has to be treated as a world. Say something even more surprising about, if we're talking about stories, that one of the things that all the writers in the world know is that you can only write about what you've experienced. Nobody, you can be the best in the world. You have to be able to experience something. Somebody will come and say, but what about all the people who write science fiction and they write this and they write that?
It's always still based.
Oh, so what is it based on? Where did they get this? It can't be that they experienced these things. So part of it you can say he's just he's putting it into,
the story.
but it's not that simple. So this
The emotions, whatever, it's like the sub-stories they've experienced.
and then they embellish it. So I'm going to say that it's more than that. And this is another thing that the therapist has to know how to do. And this is what it means to really help a person. You have to be able to become him. You have to be able to become somebody else. And we can say this, that this is about writing in general. That to write the story, you have to be able, just like the pay contains a bet, you have to be able to contain something else inside. You have to be able to contain another person inside. How do you do that? What does that mean? So there's an incredible saying. I think this is the deepest saying, I think, in all of Jewish philosophy. It says that when you know something, you become it. It says, Ilu yadativ heitiv. It says about Hashem. It was said about Hashem. That if I would be able to know Him, I would become Him. Heitiv. That knowledge is the same as becoming. We talked about it in the sense of creation. But here it's saying that really you're creating within yourself that thing that you're knowing. To know something means to create it in yourself. To become it, to be able to contain it. That's why the mouth here is so important, because the mouth is the place where I'm holding things, as it were. We'll see in a moment exactly how this is related to other. But the first thing that you have to know about it is that knowledge makes you into things, whereas understanding and wisdom don't. I'll say it another way, again, that dat is what unifies the male and female. Chokhmah and Binah. It's what creates the child. There is no child unless there's dat. There has to be knowledge. What does this mean in terms of therapy? If I know something, I become it. To really know that the person that I'm with, and basically this is all of how all of psychology is trying to work. But here we're saying that that this is a special capacity of knowledge. You have to understand where you're doing this. It's not about understanding them, and it's not about even seeing how they became what they are. It's about containing them. Knowledge means to contain something.
In Hebrew, there's a good word.
Le'achil. There's no word. I tried to think about how you say it in English, and it's one of the few words that it was taken from English, I think, because what they tried to say was that you have to be. It's not tolerance. I thought of the word this morning.
Embrace.
Accepting. Acceptance. That's really what they mean.
What's the word?
Hachala.
Acceptance is very removed.
But acceptance, yeah,
I accept.
it's like being patient with somebody.
Contain is a pretty good word. Okay.
But how can you say that doesn't?
Hold, to contain.
I don't know what the word is.
Yeah, I know it's not like
Embody.
this.
So annoying that I was trying to
To
say.
embody is already too close.
Okay? But really,
That's a good one.
what you're doing is exactly that. You're embodying somebody. You're imbuing yourself with something else. Le'achil means not just to be able to accept, not just to be able to tolerate, but really, in its essence, it means that I'm enveloping you. I'm taking you into me. That's real hachala. And you could say that it used to be called, before there was hachala, hachala is a modern word, before that was called kiruv hadat. That's how Chazal call it. That our dat is shared, that we share each other's consciousness. What does this mean? How does this play out in therapy? It's not the same thing as understanding. Understanding is saying that I understand. Understanding is rational. It's like I understand how what you do follows from how you feel, or how you suffer from A, B, C, and D.
Well, you have to find it.
Wisdom, hold on. Wisdom is that I understand how you became that. They're called omek reshit and omek acharit. That's what they're called in Sefer Yetzirah. Wisdom is always figuring how did I come to this place, and bina, understanding, is where are we going from here. But that's not that. Neither of them is that. Again, wisdom is understanding your pathology. Understanding is knowing what to expect. But neither of these is yet to le'achil otcha, is to completely live. It's almost like I have to live you. So it's not the same thing. Because knowing and understanding, wisdom and understanding here are just, you can read them in a book. It says this pathology is, that's what the DSM does. Again, it tells you if you have these symptoms, this is where the person came from. It also may tell you what the prognosis is going to be, where they're going to go, like how they're going to act. But it doesn't tell you anything about what is the story of their lives, what's going on here. Because to see that, I have to introduce something, a third element into this whole story. And that's called dat. So what is dat here? So it says that I can't judge somebody until I come to their place. What does that mean?
Because you can't.
What does it mean? I'll say it in Hebrew, and maybe it'll strike a recollection. אל תדון את חברך עד שתגיע למקומו. You can't judge somebody else until you come to their place.
So you've been there.
That wisdom and understanding gives me.
No, you've
I'm
arrived
thinking
there
of its
yourself.
original state, like makom, like
Meaning?
Hashem.
Exactly.
That's
But how does that work here? How does that work here? I said the wisdom is understanding the past. And Bina, understanding, is understanding the future. That is understanding the present. The question about the present is why or how is Hashem containing you right now? He's your makom right now. That's what I'm looking for. To have that of somebody else is to do the cheshbon, try to understand why is Hashem keeping him here? What does Hashem want from him? What is Hashem doing through him? What's going on here? What is he, call it, enacting? What is he bringing out into the world? That's to understand his real story. To have doubt of something, to hold it really in my mind, is to ask, you could say, not purpose, because I'm not talking about what will be the end. I'm talking about what right now, at this moment, is he revealing in the world. How is this a divine act right now? To really have doubt of somebody is to see their godliness. It's to see their present. Their present is some revelation of Hashem. You could say that it's to see their tzelem, if you want. To see their image of God in them. But I don't want to turn it into something like a static picture. But rather that Hashem is doing something through them right now. What is the first thing that he's doing through them for me? So a lot of therapists, they see very much of the divine in every patient that comes in. Everyone that comes in, it's another such and such sum that they get. So that's what Hashem is doing for me, that I get more. But that aside, what is he? What in every interaction, everything that they're telling me, they're playing a divine role. That's what it means to see, to have dat of them. To really, when can I really la'achil mashu? To really accept something. When I see that this is part of Hashem. If I don't see this as part of Hashem, then it's just bothering me, or it's why take the trouble? With my children, it's the same thing. With my wife, it can be the same thing. With my neighbor, it can be the same thing. If I'm not constantly saying this is Hashem, to see his makom means to see how Hashem is holding him right now, how he's containing him right now. And it could be that it's for me, it could be for somebody else, but it's something. I have to see that through, to have the experience of the divine coming out through this person. And sometimes the message is for me, sometimes it's not. Reb Nachman says about this, Od me'at ve'en rasha v'itbonant al mekomo ve'inenu, a pasuk from Mishlei. It says, soon there will be no evil person, because, so he reads it, because you will meditate on his place. V'itbonant al mekomo ve'inenu, and then he disappears. The moment that you meditate on the fact, or you meditate again, think about it, and try to experience it, that Hashem is holding him here right now for some reason. So Hashem is giving him room. So all the evil falls away. Because Hashem is not doing it for evil. He has a good purpose for it. That's how you elevate it. The biggest thing in therapy is always to elevate. That's what the Medrash does. It's to elevate and to uncover how this is all something higher than what it looks like. That it's much more than what it just looks like. And that's a constant, if I said, you don't need to talk too much. But if you do talk, which is more than just saying, and how do you feel about that, trying to help a person discover more and more about them, it has to be about a medrash that says, well, could this be that Hashem is revealing through you this and this? Whatever it is. The moment that you bring Hashem into the story, the person comes out of their subjectivity and unifies with the objective nature of reality. They don't fall back into themselves. It's an incredible thing when you see it happening. There might be resistance at some level, but when they get used to seeing it this way, so suddenly everything has meaning. I'm not going through the suffering for nothing. That brings out the story in the person's life. So, we said, other is the dat here. But there's another way, and we said the dat is in the mouth. But there's one more last point that's related to this time of year. That the 3 months of Shvat, Adar, and Nisan that we're smack in the middle of right now, their senses are related to the mouth, all 3 of them. The chush, the sense of Shvat, is eating. Okay. What does it mean? It means to elevate through eating, but really it means everything that I digest into myself goes through my mouth. So here what it's saying is that the digestion, le'achil, begins with the mouth. It's a type of dat. Then there's the month of Adar, whose sense, as I hope people remember, is laughter. So that's why it's Adar, v'nafochu, right? But then Nisan, that's speech itself. And so these 3 months are the only months that are related to the mouth, and they come all 3 at once. And it's all related. The whole redemption, everything is related to the mouth.
You seem out of order.
Okay, why?
Because you should have speech first.
Why?
Because
That's not what I expected you to say.
sorry,
But
I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I want to say.
Because first laughter.
No, because the speaking is what helps you contain. If you speak,
okay.
then it brings you to the level of being able to hold and contain and find a story. And then maybe laugh. I don't know. But I'm saying, I don't know the order. The speech is at the end. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
Because the speech was a tool.
First
we were
it's
saying.
eating, then it's laughing, then it's speaking.
So what's the eating? Again, if they're in order, so what are they? Eating, laughter, and speech.
The eating is the containing, I guess.
So think about regular human relations.
Action,
Breakfast, lunch.
What?
action, thought, and speech.
Wait, eating.
That could be.
When you intake and you
Eating
when
is
you
absorbing,
uplift,
laughter is giving it, I don't know.
Actions, emotions, and speech.
Eating, taking in, laughter,
Should I
reacting,
do what I
speaking, changing.
Not much
Weird
should I do
going.
what I said?
No, just think about like regular human interactions. How do they work? So first of all, you go eat. You eat. Yeah, you have a suda together.
Then we warm up and laugh.
And then there's the laughter. Laughter
we get
means
serious.
right, that we have a common wavelength, that we understand each
It's like
other.
therapy.
Sense of
Yeah,
humor.
exactly.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sense of
And only then does the speech really start.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so there has to be eating. So the question the question is, how do you do eating in therapy? It's not so simple because you can't invite somebody out to dinner.
Small talk.
Okay.
Oh, nice shirt.
also what it is, it's elevating. It's elevating.
It's connection. It's that
You
first
said
connection.
it's not just eating, it's elevating. It's bringing Hashem into this place. Right?
So I'll say it like this, that if you're the therapist, you're the one preparing the meal. So really, it's to provide for somebody.
But it's to provide something divine for that person.
So that later. First, start with something physical. That's what it's saying. Like the Baal Shem Tov said, first you do a favor.
Spice is in there.
First you do a favor and you take care of a person's physical needs. Only then can you begin to address their spiritual needs. But you can't start, that's why every Chabad house, first of all, what does it do? It gets people out of jail or whatever it does. Kind of feeds them. After you've fed them, then you can talk about something else. But before you can talk about something else, the main thing is really this middle stage of laughter. If we don't share laughter together, I can't really trust you. It's all about, you took care of me, I owe you. But it's not the same thing as saying that we're now on the same wavelength. That we have the same, call it like this, that we have the same take on reality, the same expectations out of what life is about. And if we can share laughter, it means, I'm not talking about just cheap laughter, I'm talking about laughter that it suddenly it catches you when you really laugh with somebody we share something. And if you can reach that stage, then you can start talking. then it says even more than that the Geula comes when Mazal of Dli is Shvat, the Aquarius, comes into the house of what they call what do they call it, the land? No, the Taleh. How do they say Taleh?
Sagittarius.
No, is it?
Unicorn. Isn't it the last one?
No.
The one actually before?
No. No.
What is it?
Wait, we're talking about one of the mazalot? What's
Yeah,
it?
Taleh. How do you say Taleh in
Oh,
English?
just say all of them.
Capricorn.
Yeah,
Capricorn.
I was like unicorn.
So this is from the Ibn Ezra, who's a big astrologist. So he says that when this is a what they call the age of Aquarius.
But Shvat is Aquarius.
When Aquarius is in,
Capricorn?
comes to the beginning of the whole zodiac. You don't have to wait to the very end, which is at Pisces, or however they say, Pisces. The fish go into the Capricorn.
Into Tevet? Capricorn is before Shvat.
Oh, Capricorn is the Gdi. So what's the Taleh? No, Taleh.
Nissan.
Ken Nissan.
No, it's the
Taurus, Aries. It's Aries.
Aries. No,
Aries.
I guess. I don't know.
That's Nissan.
Okay. So whatever Nissan is. Anyway, it's not, you don't have to think about astrology in that way. You just have to think about that there's a time period, it's something you see in the sky, that now, it's called the progression or something like this of the mazalot through the different, where the year starts. It starts with Aquarius. We're off by 2 months, as it were, if you want. From the beginning of the creation, which was 6,000 years ago, we've moved all the way through 10 mazalot going through beginning the year, and now it's Aquarius. It's what they call the age of Aquarius. And to tell you the truth, I don't understand enough about astronomy to be able to say exactly what it is. But it means the progression of the mazalot through the zodiac. So this one starts the year, or something like that. What does it mean? That it starts when, that redemption is when you're able to take the first sense of the mouth, which is to provide, and that itself churns into it, enters into speech. Okay. That the achila joins together with the speech. What causes that? What causes that is what's in the middle, adal, the laughter. I'll say it this way, that in therapy, laughter is not just when we're on the same wavelength. It's when you can begin to look at things and you feel in the Greek sense, it's called you feel the sea. Lost the words there. No. Catharsis. That's what it's balkut. It's like you let go. Like suddenly it's not as terrible as it was. That moment when you suddenly feel that you have a weight lifted off of you, you can laugh at it. But you don't have to necessarily laugh at it because it might not be a joke, it might be something very serious. But it doesn't have the same weight. This is the moment that you get the meaning. When you have meaning, suddenly, or you understand how Hashem is working through this, how this is advancing, how this is worth living through, then that's that moment of laughter. When that happens, then you can begin to talk. Then the speech really begins. What is the speech? The speech is already that I understand that everything that's happening to me is an expression of faith. That's really what speech is, because the chush of Nisan is speech, but in the Sfirot it's a mantiki adaber, that I'm able to speak faith. Meaning, that's the moment when the person doesn't need you anymore as a therapist, because they can do it themselves.
Really, what we need from a therapist is that other stage, not the
Right.
That's what I was kind of saying. Like we do the need something a lot ourselves. We do.
That's almost like saying you're already You can strike on your own. You don't need me.
Right, okay, because we kept talking about speech as the thing, but really it's this laughter thing. There's someone...
The moment of
like
catharsis.
the tipping point of seeing, shifting everything.
And all this is all that. All these things are all related to that. And what's the amazing thing? That the laughter is the fish, and they don't speak at all. They can't open their mouths, nothing comes out. So I guess what are fish doing when they're opening their mouths? They're laughing. So they breathe, but at the same time they're laughing. Okay, but this is the thing I wanted to end with, and I sort of left it hanging. I want to finish it. How do writers write about something that they have not experienced? So that's what that does. That if you can understand the meaning of somebody's life, you can understand the person themselves. That's the trick here. To really, yadativ means hayitiv. When you know something fully, and to know it means to understand what is it standing on. That's how you can write about something that you don't know anything about. You have to be able, though, to see Hashem holding it up. That's what they do. So it might be that they don't call it Hashem, it's fine. Say it another way. When is writing good? When you feel that it's a real world, that you feel that there's a real story going on here. That can only happen. A real world is if something is holding it up, if it's contained, if it has some kind of closure to it, if you want, or whatever. You have this feeling that you're describing something that's alive. Why is it alive? Because something's holding it up. Something's giving it room. In a certain sense, that's what the writer is doing. They're describing the room that they've given this person inside themselves. When J.K. Rowling talked about Harry Potter, she said, he just walked into me suddenly. So even though she says he walked into me fully and complete, I believe that, but I think it took her a long time to get to know him. It's like, it started with the Da'at experience of, I can give this thing room. I have room in myself for him. But she gets to know him. And what would he do here? What do we do? That moment that if you usually it works the other way around. That you get to know, and slowly you give hachala. Where is the strongest? And that's with the Kuvim also. That it says one was the face of an adult and one was the face of a child. Remember I said this last week. They were both male. One's a father and one is a son. What's the idea behind it? That a father or a parent gives room for the child. He's not so interested in how he acted, because he's willing to forgive everything all the time. There's no problem. You can always forgive anything that the child did. Why? Because of his natural connection with him. But really, the real contribution that you give to your children is that you mechilotam, you contain them. Meaning, my role as a therapist is not to criticize. Again, it's to elevate all the time. Elevation is the same thing as criticism if you look at it from a certain perspective. The person by himself understands, again, that I don't want to see myself the way I've seen myself until now. They'll do the criticism for themselves. We haven't talked about this here so much, but one of the main tenets of Torah therapy is that my role is to be, actually we did talk about it, at least in these terms, that my role is to be my client's advocate. I'm not Hashem's advocate. I'm not here to tell you what Hashem wants from you. And how wrong you are, and you're like this and that. I'm here to, that you'll do for yourself, trust me, you'll do it fine. The moment that we set a higher standard for who you could be, that you'll do yourself the criticism by yourself. You don't need me for that. You need me to show you something higher. Same thing with a child. I can criticize, That's fine. You could criticize, but even if the child does something wrong, you still accept them fully. That's really what it's like. That's what it means to have dat of somebody. That I could be your space. That you could live inside me. Okay? And there would be nothing lacking. You would never feel that I had to cut out pieces to make you fit my picture of what you need to be. Why? Because I'm constantly elevating you. I'm constantly feeling that you can do more. So when people came to the Rebbe, for instance, that was exactly the feeling that they got. They didn't get the feeling the Rebbe was criticizing them. They felt that most of the Rebbe was elevating them. But he completely contained you. It was like, not only contained you, contained the higher picture of you. And that's the feeling that you got. So that's the main goal of dat in therapy. And then you can write their story. In other words, you have to be able to write a story. I say it practically, that you can only say that you really know somebody if you can write their story out. You might not be a writer, so you won't do it in practice. Mm-hmm. But that you feel that it's not just folk psychology. It's not even Western psychology. It's really to give them their space. You really contain who they are.
It can go both ways. You can either, tell me if it can, you can either work to make that space, like, let me be your space, and then I begin to see your life story, or I get this glimpse of, I know why you're here, or I see the manifestation of God in life, and then I can contain all of you and continuously guide you.
Yeah, but for that you have to be a Rebbe.
Fine, but I'm saying that...
To do it that quickly,
okay.
A regular person has to get to know you.
Some people have a natural gift though, some people get to know.
That's a Rebbe.
I disagree. I think women especially, are much more intuitive than men, and can walk into a lot of people have them talking to you by looking at them.
And if it's right, then it's Rebbe. If it's wrong, then it's intuition.
Or even...
There's a lot of people who think they know.
Right.
Right? They have the sense that I already know. So then if you would spend 20 hours with a person, you would realize, oh, wait a minute, it's not what I thought at all. A lot of people think that they have. We're again, if it's right, then you're a Rebbe. That's what it means. Okay? That the person can trust that first instinct that tells them that this is what the person is like. But what are you doing? You're grabbing the infinite in one moment. So
there are people who spend their whole life education and teaching and nurturing. I've also got that gift and ability.
So if they're right, again, depends on at what level. If they're right, that's a Rebbe quality. It's not very common. Again, I think a lot of people think they have it, but most of the time they're wrong. It's also called, another name for it is Ruach HaKodesh. That's what it means. So if I say it like that, then people are more afraid to say I have it.
I have a friend of mine, his name was Nifta, and we didn't know people, went up to them and said things about them, which nobody else knew. He had this wonderful gift of being something.
Okay, so that's Ruach HaKodesh. If he's right, it's Ruach HaKodesh.
And sometimes happen in parenting as well.
And the question is, why wasn't he a Rebbe?
Because there's a Rebbe.
So you see?
He wasn't, he was called it, but he didn't want that title.
Well, you see that's people, if it's true, people...
It's a gift.
It's not just a gift. It's a task. If you have it, you have to use it. It's responsible.
Can't it happen in parenting sometimes? Like you can not understand your child and your whole life be like just trying to figure out how to give them space.
You have to.
At a young age, you can notice who your child is, and suddenly.
Right. That's what the Rizal says. That you have to understand where he is, and you have to go to great pains to understand it. Even if
sometimes a parent.
And especially since he says in these generations there's a big gap. There's a real generational gap. That he's from a completely different tribe than you are. Mm-hmm. You don't get it at all. You don't understand where. So there's another meaning, by the way, to eating. It says that in the future the tzaddikim will eat amei aratzot, the simple people. So people who sounds like cannibalism. What it means is that they can contain. It used to be that the tzaddikim couldn't contain regular people. Why couldn't they contain? They couldn't. It almost sounds the same also in Hebrew when they say le'achil. It's almost the same as le'achil. It's to give them food. But it's also to eat them. Can le'echol otam. Le'achil is like le'echol.
You know, when someone says I can't eat it, like.
Again, I can't, there's
Digest.
a word.
In English or
In English is the exact word that I can't think of
down
it.
it.
Yeah, that's like slang. There's an exact word that exactly means that if I can eat you, it means that I can stomach you, okay? That I can stand you. Okay? And
I can't stomach you.
Right, that's.
yeah, but it's also a little slangy. There's an exact word in Mamish. I can't think of it. So, but that has to be a part of maybe the first step of all therapy. That's the month of Shvat, and then Adar, and then come to laughter, which is, and finally, if the laughter happens, if that stage is done properly, then they come to Emunah, then they come to speech by themselves.
But the containing that you do before you know them is incomparable to the containing you do when you begin to see their divinity.
100%.
So it's like at the beginning you're trying to contain them.
You're only containing in order to
get
to how Hashem is containing them.
After the speech, you can really contain them.
And then even more with the speeches, even more.
Just one point, like I know maybe we're talking about one aspect of therapy right now about finding Hashem in their story, but we spoke a lot about finding yourself in their story. Is that not? Are you like forgetting about that right now?
No, I'm saying that even your objectivity is still a limited objectivity, meaning if you don't learn and you don't have a complex or instead of complex, called a rich understanding of what Hashem wants in the world, how He describes things. You don't learn a lot of Torah, so it becomes very difficult to relate to them properly. But you can only relate from where you are.
That I understand. I'm saying more the thing of when the person comes to you with their story, their problem, their pain, or whatever. We spoke a lot about finding the part in you that has struggled with that, or has identified with that.
Okay.
Is that different to finding Hashem? It's the same. It's connected. It's two different.
That's what I'm saying. That if you read a lot of regular books, so it could be that it's different than Hashem. All your experiences are either yours or that you read them somewhere else. So if you read other books, it could, but if you've gone through therapy yourself, you understand how Hashem is working with you, and you learn Torah constantly. So the way you relate to them,
they always connect to. Can I find Hashem in their story? And it has nothing to do with me.
there has to be an element like that. Otherwise, why are they here?
Okay.
There has to be that I'm learning something new from this. Okay? I'm reinterpreting everything that I learned all the time. So that's also that. Remember, I don't remember if you remember this from last week. It says that for Hashem to constantly choose us means that He's constantly as if doing tshuva on what He expected from us. It's like He also has to do tshuva. What's His tshuva? That He thought we would be perfect and we would be A, B, C, and D. For Him to choose us at every moment is to say, this is what I wanted. It's tshuva on my thoughts as well as on my expectations. That's how He chooses us every moment. And how I choose my children every moment, how I choose my spouse every moment, also from the same place. I have to do tshuva on my expectations. I can't leave my expectations the way they were. They have to constantly be dynamic. So we kept saying that is creation. It's creating something new. And again, that's why dat is everywhere in the end, because we can put dat in every single place. And every single place it creates the bond. And the bond is always alive. It has to be alive. It has to be also dynamic. Like in the body, it's the cartilage. Cartilage is growing constantly. It's being replaced constantly. It's when it starts being replaced that you start having problems. Okay? But because it's a connection between two bones. It's getting a lot of wear and tear. It has to constantly renew itself. Okay. The same way, all the connections inside the psyche, they have to constantly be renewable. Even though the psyche is infinite, the difference again is that you can always have new dat. There's no problem. You can always find more. Seder. So next week